All right, so let's move on with who you're really wanting to watch tonight, which is Tim Herron. Tim Herron is the owner of Tim Herron Shooting. He is a USPSA Grand Master shooter and a master class IDPA shooter. He's been instructing since 2015 and loves working with people of all skill levels. His finely tuned eye for detail and personal trial and error experience gives him the ability to spot inefficiencies that many people overlook. He has a heart for teaching and makes a personal investment in the improvement of every shooter that he teaches. Let's welcome Tim Herron onto the broadcast. Hello, sir.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
Great. Thank you for coming back. So you must have had a good time last time you were here.
I did. I did.
Yeah?
It was good. It was all you. It wasn't Adam. It was you.
Yeah. Yeah. Since Adam's not here, you're saying that, huh?
No, I'm
Yeah.
glad to be
Well,
back
thanks
here.
for
Thanks
saying
for
that.
having me.
You bet. So, yeah, I told you guys if you didn't watch the first part of this interview, go back to YouTube or Rumble on the Defenders Live channel, and you can watch that. I don't know how long it's been, a few months probably, wouldn't you say, Tim?
A month or two, yeah. It didn't seem like
Yeah.
it was that long ago, but I guess it has.
Yeah, time flies, especially
No,
this
I guess
time
we're
of year. It
already
feels
in
like
May,
time goes by
right?
more quickly. Yeah, we're already in May. I think it's been a while, but anyway, if you just go back, you can search too, and you'll find it. Or you can go to the website. It's on there too. So let's see, where do we begin with Tim tonight? I have lots and lots of goodies. I think that let's start with some of your past experience has to do with performance driving and teaching that. So you've been a
Mhm.
performance, I don't know if that's the right way to term it, the performance driving instructor,
Yeah.
but you've transitioned into a firearms instructor. And I'm curious to know, are there any takeaways that you got from being an instructor for drivers that you have not maybe necessarily applied, but learned from on how people learn? And if there's any takeaways that you got from that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest thing, especially with performance driving, is that even though we're teaching, or even though that we do are used to, teach a class of say 6 to 8 students, or maybe 8 to 10 students. Um, the instructors themselves also get a lot of one-on-one time with each driver. So, and you spend a lot of time in the passenger seat, giving a driver, a lot of feedback. Hey, you're doing this well. You're not doing this quite as well. I'd like you to get your eyes out here first. Smoother inputs here. Trounce on the throttle here, or don't get on the brake so hard here. Those kind of things. And so that it really left a. I think it was a great primer for what I do now. As a shooting instructor, in that in my classes, I really take a lot of pride and spend a lot of energy on ensuring that there's a lot of one-on-one with each
Mhm.
shooter. Well, it's not just, I and like it's funny that practical performance. So my best friend AJ is listening to the show, and AJ and I teach together a lot. And it's been something that is by far and away, it's one of the biggest things that AJ and I both really have a desire to do, which is to give a lot of one-on-one feedback to each student, in our shooting classes as well. And so with driving, there is a lot of similarities even with shooting. It's a very visual sport, right? I mean, we know of a very, very few people that are like, oh man, this blind guy, like actually shot the X-ring on this target, with a lot of guidance and help and things like that. But we don't see very many blind people, like in the shooting sports. Just like
Mhm.
you don't see very many blind people behind the wheel of a car driving anywhere either. So I mean,
Mhm.
it's very visual in what we have to do. So there's a ton of similarities with, getting the eyes to lead or direct every single thing that we do, every aspect that we do, whether it be steering a car or whether it be steering a gun around.
Oh my
So,
gosh, that is a perfect segue into where I was gonna go with this because, okay, if you guys don't have the Active Self-Protection app yet, you should download it because one of Tim Herron's full classes is on there. And there's so much information. I think I got to like episode 6 and there might be like 20 some episodes of Tim Herron on there. But just in those 6 episodes, I took like 3 pages of notes. And, uh, and so one of the things you talked about, so we're tying the driving in with the shooting was Could you explain or talk about how you were saying how you explain vision to somebody with the car analogy? Do you remember, like, looking at the hood versus looking at the
Right.
horizon? Will
Right.
you do that? Was
So
brilliant how you said that.
yeah, a lot. I mean, and that's a big one, is a big takeaway, and we see this in a lot of sports. It doesn't just relate to driving, but that's where kind of my background comes from, and it's something that is relatable to every single person. You know, I tell people in the class all the time, like, "Hey, how'd you get here today? Did you take a bus? You take a cab, or did you drive?" And everybody's like, "Oh, we drove." Great. So stick with me here. Let's talk about something. And so when you think about like driving on the highway, or think about like speeding up your vision to, to a level of speed at which you want to attain, even in your shooting. You got to think about like I ask students all the time, like, do you remember the first time when you were a brand new driver and you got on the interstate? And,
Mhm.
most people are like, "Oh, yeah, I can remember that." I'm like, "You remember how petrified it was, to like you're doing 50 miles an hour and everybody's zipping by you at 70 and 80 and you're like, 'Slow down, you maniac.'" You're thinking to
Mhm.
yourself like, "I'm gonna die." And a lot of it, we don't realize how much farther ahead we actually need to prepare for things. We tend to drive when we initially get behind the wheel, and we're taught very, very early, to drive at 15 or 16 years of age, to be very defensive. And being a very defensive driver is important, but in order to be a good defensive driver, we have to learn how to drive proactively to every aspect, right? We're
Right.
making plans, we're thinking ahead, we're looking far enough
Mhm.
ahead so that we're not just driving reactively to things. And shooting is the same
Mhm.
way. We never want to
Mhm.
really shoot reactively. We want to shoot proactively. I want to have a plan in place and know exactly where I want to get my eyes first so that I can steer the gun to the direction of where my eyes lead it. So we kind of get back to that analogy in driving. Like when you're on the highway and the first time you get on the highway and you're doing 50, a lot of it is because we're looking right off the dash. We're looking, right at the speedometer. Then we're looking just off the hood of the car, and everything is zipping past us so fast. We're making all of these little corrections with the steering wheel because we are driving in a reactive state. So like think about like when you do that and you're driving down the highway, think of how many times that you make corrections to the steering wheel just to keep the car in the lane. And then think
Mhm.
about like as you start to look further ahead and further ahead and further ahead, and you acclimate your vision to getting far enough ahead of the car, of the vehicle, that you've got such a control over it visually, like you fed your brain so much information that everything seems to slow down, right?
Right.
Well, and that's where when you start to look 6, 7, 8 car lengths ahead, or like as a driving instructor, we tell you like look out as far ahead as you possibly can. Look out to the horizon. And when you start to look that far ahead, then everything slows down. You're driving, you're kind of just driving in the moment, right? And then everything just becomes a process. Shooting is exactly the same way. So, I tell people like as you start to look further ahead, 50 miles an hour becomes 60, 60 becomes 80, 80 becomes 90. Oh, and now we're getting a ticket, right? And a lot of times when you get pulled over, of course, the police officer says, "Do you understand or know how fast you are going?" And a lot of us we go, "No, I had no idea." That's because we weren't paying attention to the now. We were paying attention to the future and like ensuring that we were being as proactive as possible. Like I said,
Well,
shooting is identically the same way.
also, we're developing a comfort level at a certain speed, and I think you maybe touched on that too, because
Mhm.
as you develop subconscious competence, you also develop a comfort level of what speed feels fast to you or not, right? And so then if you
100%.
keep stretching that, then your fast can expand, right?
Exactly. And that's why setting small goals are great in your shooting, right? For from the training aspects. But at the same time, knowing that those goals constantly need to be adjusted or lifted or we
Mhm.
grow stagnant, So I mean, we take for instance most everybody, especially I recognize a lot of the names in the comments here are a lot of defensive minded shooters, and so a lot of the things that these folks are working on are things that I see in like the Ask Dry Fire Facebook group and things like that, where everybody's working on like draw to first shot. So if we take draw to first shot into account, everybody wants to have a really brisk, let's say draw the first shot to a 7-yard target in say a second. But then as soon as they achieve that, what's your next goal? Right?
Mhm.
for a lot of people, they've never even thought about what comes next. That
Mhm.
so a lot of times we grow stagnant. We hit one plateau or we hit one goal, and that becomes then it's like we have achieved that goal, but we didn't have another goal to drive to next. So we end up on this even ground where we have a plateau and we don't know what to do. So, and
Mhm.
a lot of shooters or a lot of students then immediately that's when they start to seek out instruction. They seek out
Mhm.
guidance, which is great. Um, for others, that maybe they join a Facebook group or they join a club or they seek out competition or things like that. For others, yet they may think that 1 second draw, that's what I wanted. That's the pinnacle. But then after a couple of months, they just grow stagnant. And a lot of times that stagnation turns into boredom. And when they're bored, then
Mhm.
they no longer want to dry fire. They no longer want to improve their skill set. So it's very important to
Yeah.
have, kind of micro goals, as my good friend and mentor Mike Seeklander talks about, and then kind of having more macro goals. Having something like what's the larger picture, and then
Mhm.
okay, your larger picture is set here. Now, what are your stepping stones? What's going to build the foundation to achieving that larger picture?
Yeah,
And that's
totally,
very
because I
important.
think a lot of students have a vague goal that is, "I wanna be a better shooter." Well, what does that mean? You know?
Exactly.
Isn't that the
It's always, yes, I'd love to be a better shooter. Better than what? Well, I want to be better than I was yesterday. Okay, well, what's that mean though? Right? Like, how good are you now? What are you wanting to achieve? And you have to have like specific directives if you want to
Mhm.
achieve success and progression. It can't be like, well, I just want to be better. Okay, I'd like to wake up every day and I have the goal in mind. I want to be a better person. But what does that mean? Like, what
Right.
makes
You
me a
have
better
to
person than
define
I
it.
was yesterday? You've got to have some sort of carrot dangling to
Right.
drive your progression.
And don't you have a class that sort of talks about that
Man,
or helps
a
people with that once
techno
they get
bar.
I know. Well, I just remember from the last interview, there was a class that so tell us about that.
We do. So I can take only about 30% credit for this. So you have interviewed, like I said, you've interviewed my best good friend, AJ Zito of Practical
Yeah, that was a
Performance.
great interview.
And AJ is God, he's so amazing. I freaking love that guy. So AJ approached me about 2 years ago, and AJ has hosted me forever. We've taken classes together. We've known each other for a long time. But AJ approached me one day on the phone, and we talk. We're worse than a couple of schoolgirls. I mean, we'll talk on the phone for hours. I mean, literally hours every week. And he
I'm
called me
just
one day, and he
picturing
was
this
like,
in my
"Hey,
head.
I've got a question." And I was like, "Okay, shoot." And he's like, do you ever get approached with students after a class where they say, "Man, Tim, that class was great. You taught me all of these wonderful techniques. Now, if I just knew how to incorporate them and how to make them like how to practice them, that would be great. Do you have any tips and tricks to that?" And a lot of times, and I know AJ has done it too, where you're kind of looking at the student with this like this thousand yard gaze where you're just like, were you not just paying attention to the class and like what we were just talking about? But I understand though, and AJ did too. He was like, I see it all the time. A lot of people don't know how to implement technique or things that they learned in a class into their own training. Why hasn't anybody actually designed a curriculum to help a student learn and understand what what value and how to regiment and how to log data and how to analyze and get feedback from training, and how to build a proper practice regimen? And I was like, you're a genius. How are we going to do this? And that involved then about a multitude of like 5 to 6 hour long phone calls as we created a 1 day program. And we were going to teach that 1 day program just to kind of accentuate either one of his 2 day flagship classes or one of my 2 day flagship classes. And it was going to be just like an additional day where you could take the 2 day class and then you could stick around for a third day, either before or after the class, to learn how to implement these habits into better practice, into better practice habits. And
Mhm.
we did the 1 day class, and it was a hit. But for AJ and I, we left that 1 day class. We like, I mean, we got 8 to 10 hours worth of information. This is awesome. we got done with the class. We were like, man, we didn't get to cover this. We didn't get to cover this. We didn't get to cover this in as much detail as we wanted. And the next thing you know, we were like, man, this should be a 2-day curriculum. And so we didn't really scrap the 1 day, but we wanted to expand that 1 day into a 2-day curriculum. So our 1 day class was called Practice with Purpose, kind of a catchy title. But it also kind of, it really tells you kind of like what it is that you're going to be doing in that class, learning how to practice with purpose. And that 1 day program turned into a 2-day program that we call Train for Mastery. And that Train for Mastery is co-instructed. I don't teach it on my own. AJ doesn't teach it on his own. We teach it together across the country. So when we get clubs or hosts that want to seek us out for, their folks or members to be able to, to take a class where they can actually learn how to implement really good practice habits. And that's where this came from.
That's perfect, because what you did was you noticed a need that people, if people keep asking the same questions over and over, either
Right. Eventually you're going to have
know,
to answer them or just ignore them completely. And,
yeah,
AJ was, he was a much smarter man than me to say, like, why aren't we answering this particular question, or this problem? If there's a, something lacking in this community, why aren't we stepping up to the plate to do this? And like I said, I mean, it honestly now, and not to take away from my own curriculum, like I love my practical performance curriculum. It's my heart and soul, but I truly and absolutely love teaching Train for Mastery. For one, I don't have to do all of the teaching. I get to share the responsibilities with AJ, and I am such a fan of AJ, and getting to see him really shine, on the range and with his ability to teach and convey information to students. It's awesome to get to sit back and be like, we're so like-minded, but then there's also differences in how we approach our own learning and our own progression and our own practice. So you get, from a student standpoint, you get 2 master instructors with kind of 2 different routes, and a roadmap, so to speak, to get you to, your end goal, which is, it's super cool. It's super cool.
Yeah. What a treat. What a treat for students, because those are, 2 incredible people to learn from. So yeah. And go back and watch AJ Zito's interview. I think it was 2 weeks ago that we did that. I had a lot of fun. So we are going to have him back on again. I think I scheduled him for like October. Yeah. This fall or something. So yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask you about more specific concepts that
Please.
I saw in your, what was the class that was on the Active Self-Protection app? Practical Performance?
That's my
Okay.
practical performance class. I think
Yeah,
right
you
now
guys.
they've only got like 16 parts or something, which is all of day 1.
Okay.
We John had to rely on himself to do all of the capturing of the video. And
Yeah.
because of that, of course, I guess it's taking a lot longer in editing because he's not a
Oh,
professional videographer.
yeah.
So, so
He
like
still did a good job though.
he did a great job. So day
Mhm.
2 is in editing now, and that will be released. I'm hoping. I think Neil Widener told me it was going to be just probably another week or so. They're hoping. So
Oh,
yeah, there's a whole day 2, which I'm sure is going to be another 14 or 18 parts or whatever
yeah.
to watch
And it's
soon.
deep dive. It's deep dive. Well, maybe not for you, but I mean, you go into detail about things. I'm like, wait a second. I'm like writing it down on my notebook, and I'm like, I think this is really good. I think I should be sharing this with people. So I'm going to talk about a few things.
Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the things, and this is all just about grip. I mean, you could do this for literally anything you talked about, but you think grip is simple, and it is sort of. But
You're right.
okay, so let's just dive into it. So the first thing you said that I wrote down was, we're using the wrong index point when we're going to the holster. Most people use the web of their hand as their index point going to the holster. So take it
Mhm.
away on that one, Tim, because that's something not everyone has heard before, right?
So it is most. I mean, I don't say we, but it's been taught that way for, ever. When we
Yeah.
access the gun, from the holster, to always like kind of use the web of your hand in this area right here, and you drive it down onto the back strap, and then you kind of slide it up into the top end of the tang or the beaver tail to make sure that
Mhm.
hand is as high as it can go on the pistol before we grasp the gun and then lift it out of the holster to, to establish that master grip. I'm a little bit different in that the problem with having the web of your hand is that, and I'm going to use my ink pen here.
Do you have your blue gun? Oh,
man, I should have, right? So, but anyway, so I'm just going to use an ink pen for this. If I have the web of my hand, I can drive my web of my hand in any direction, right? On what would be, say, this pen being the pistol. And as soon as I make contact with the web of my hand, we're told that should be enough of an index to then grasp the gun as we need to be able to lift it out of the holster. The problem is, though, and I'm going to use this calculator. Actually, I'm going to use my cell phone for this since I didn't bring a book. So
I should have told you.
Pistol here. And so let's say the pistol, obviously, if we turn it this way, that's the whole side of the gun. And this side, right, is the back strap. If I index my hand left or right, but I don't get my hand in the proper spot, as soon as I index the gun with my web of my hand and I grab the gun, or I grasp the gun from the holster, I could end up with my entire palm on either side of the gun and not appropriately on the backstrap of the gun to give the support along the backstrap that I need for good recoil management or good sight presentation or dot presentation. This, in my opinion, is about 90% of the reason why most people, especially when we talk about like red dot pistols, because that's all the rage, right? The last 4 or 5 years, that seems like everybody's teaching a red dot class. And we hear everything from add pinky pressure to make sure your support hand's doing this and make sure you're adding this a little bit of pressure and turn the gun this way and do this and do that, when the majority of issues could be solved by simply indexing your hand to the gun a little bit differently. So instead of indexing the web of the hand to the tang first, the very first point of contact I want to make on the gun, because it tells me exactly where my hand's going to be, is the base of my palm right down here on the bottom, kind of below the pinky, right down here. So I want the gun to situate itself in the hand, utilizing the entire palm itself, not just kind of the drumstick portion at the base of the thumb, because that leaves so much exposed backstrap on the back of the gun that you're going to fight and fight and fight recoil. And of course, that turns into another problem. And that problem is, as the gun continues to move, we then try to rely on strength versus technique to try to control what the gun's going to do. And that strength then manifests itself into, now we have a limited amount of trigger control because our entire dominant hand is now fighting for, again, for strength or dominance or control on the pistol. So we lose the ability for our index finger to manipulate the trigger in isolation.
It's so simple, yet it's not something always thought about.
Right.
But if you think about it, if the gun is lined up, and actually I'm glad you don't have a blue gun, because I think we get kicked off the internet if we show a gun on a live show. Is what I've been told. Yeah. So I'm glad you don't have a blue gun, because they probably think that one was real. But you talked about how the gun needs to line up with the arm.
Correct.
You showed direction. Yeah, you showed how, and it makes total sense why you would want your structure to line up with the gun properly in order to mitigate recoil, and not only that, have accurate shooting.
Sure.
Because if it's not lined up correctly and you're not looking at it correctly and everything's out of, and it doesn't take much either.
Right. And you're constantly fighting for control with both hands on the pistol. Right.
Right.
And not only just fighting for control with both hands, but then you're also fighting for visual confirmation and visual control as well. If the gun's not aligned properly in the hand, as soon as the pistol then is presented, between your eye and the target, that also is what dictates whether or not the dot or the sights actually present directly to the eye, or if they're off. We hear the argument all the time that that the red dot itself is always at the 12 o'clock position, and that just adding a little bit of this or a little bit of this is what drops the dot down from 12 o'clock. But how often have you ever presented the gun and the dot wasn't at 12 o'clock? No matter how much pressure you added to the gun, and you
Mm-hmm.
canted the gun even lower, the dot just simply wasn't there. And that's because the dot was misaligned to the 3 o'clock out of the window, or the 9 o'clock out of the window, or the 1 or the 2, or wherever the case
Mm-hmm.
may be. And the
Mm-hmm.
majority of misalignment of the sights or misalignment of the dot to the window are caused by the way we're accessing the pistol with our dominant hand, first and foremost. And then the way your support hand accesses the pistol after that is going to either help improve the grip, or it's going to further compromise the grip based on where the support hand goes on the gun because of a bad dominant hand grip to begin with.
Right, and didn't you demonstrate, chicken winging and bringing your
Mhm.
shoulder down and in whenever you're doing appendix, and that affects all of that
Absolutely.
when you get that gun out of the holster.
Absolutely. It's funny, when I first started teaching practical performance, grip is always something I talked about, but as as the class and as the curriculum really evolved, and as I received feedback from students, it's funny how I used to teach about 4 to 5 different kind of blocks of instruction on day 1. Like, I couldn't help it, like, being an instructor, you just like, I wanna give everybody 1,000,000% of everything that I can bring to the table,
Everything.
and it's so
Yeah,
funny now how day 1 really in my class has been rendered down to where we spend the majority of our morning on day 1 really talking about all of the refinements and all of the little nuances of hand position and grip position and pressures and things like that, and then getting the students to experience that and experiment with what truly works best for them. This has
right.
never been a class about like, hey, I want you to adopt my grip and my grip only because that'll make you a better shooter. My goal
Mhm,
is then, is now to really, I want you to evolve your grip. And if we can make your grip 15, 20, 30, 50% better than it was before you came to class, then I've made you a better shooter, not just
mhm.
not just an emulation of me, right? I
Right.
want the student to grow on their own path, but be able to have the freedom to
Mhm,
experience those things on their own. And so that it's
mhm.
funny, AJ and I, because we talk after every class, AJ was the one that sometimes I'm like, man, AJ, that class I felt really, really wordy. Like, we got into grip and it feels like I spent like 45 minutes to an hour talking about it. And AJ's like, yeah, maybe, but every word people are learning from, don't
Mhm,
don't give that up. Don't lose that. Like, that's
mhm,
such an integral part of the puzzle for shooters that,
mhm,
like, giving up that to try to just breeze through other material, I think would do you a disservice. Like, you teach grip,
mhm,
and AJ kind of toots my horn for me. He's like, you teach grip better than anybody that I know because you talk about all of these finer nuances of it that nobody else covers. Most everybody's like, okay, we're going to talk about grip. They get into it for 5 or 10 minutes, hold the gun like this, hold the gun like this, and
yeah.
just shoot the gun and sort things out. And it's like, but sometimes people need more guidance than that. And so that's kind of what this has turned into.
Well,
So
they need
I've been,
context behind it, Tim, and that's what you gave. That's why I liked listening to that so much is because it wasn't that we just do this. I wanna know why. And you're
I've been
so good
accused
at
of my 2-day
explaining
program
why.
now being Tim Herron's grip clinic instead of
It
practical
could be.
performance. But it
It could be.
right. It's okay. Like, I'm actually I'm totally okay with it.
Okay, so one more thing I wanna go over about it because I don't wanna stay in grip forever, but,
Sure.
we're gonna if we do that, we're gonna run out of time, and we're getting close to the Q&A session, guys, so if you have questions, drop those in the comments, we're gonna be getting to those later. So the next thing that I wrote down was, I wrote down, "One small deviation from a purely neutral position can affect your shooting," and then you said, "A majority of presentation issues have to do with support hand placement and grip pressures."
Mhm.
So, what is getting overlooked with the support hand? I feel like the support hand gets overlooked so much.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
with
We use the
most
dominant hand
shooters.
for everything, and really,
Mhm,
when you really break it down, the dominant hand, right, is responsible for a multitude of tasks. So it has to multitask in things. So you're asking that hand, right, to grasp the pistol, to be able to then place the pistol appropriately, kind of with, in the right spot so that when the support hand starts to hold the gun, then that hand then is free or even maybe to isolate that finger so that that finger can press the trigger without any other influence from the rest of the hand. And instead, what we try to do is we try to muscle the heck out of the gun with one hand, and we overgrip the gun with one hand, which then takes away the dexterity of that index finger to be able to isolate itself away from the rest of the hand. This is where a lot of low left issues come from if you're a right-handed shooter, or low and right issues if you're a left-handed shooter, or a lot of horizontal stringing in our shooting. When we start to diagnose patterns that happen on targets, a lot of it is because of either an overabundance of grip pressure with the dominant hand or an imbalance of pressure between dominant and support hands. So the support hand itself, though, really has one job, and its job is to be the support for the pistol. It's not the hand along for the ride. It's not the hand that's supposed to just look like it's in the right spot on the gun. Its true job is it's got one job, and it's to grip the heck out of the pistol to keep the gun from moving while I'm manipulating the trigger any which way I want to, so that I can keep the sights or keep the dot aligned to the target.
Well, and
So
the reason why we have to grip so much more with the left hand, though, isn't it because we are dominantly, well, I know you're left-handed, but
sure.
for us right-handed dominant people, that's the whole point. It's a dominant hand for a reason, probably has more strength anyway. And so don't we sort of have to, I want to say overcompensate with the left hand, but
No,
don't we have to work even harder with the left hand?
you do at first, but you would be
Okay.
surprised. I put a grip dynamometer, on like the grip scale, like digital grip dynamometers, where you could grip it and it tells you how many pounds of pressure that you can squeeze with your hands.
Mhm.
Unless, now we're not talking about mobility issues or things like that, but unless you've got a severe mobility issue, most people's grip strength, believe it or not, are within 10% of each other. So even though
Really?
you feel like, okay, I'm right-handed, I'm right hand dominant, I grip everything with my right hand, it's got more strength than my left hand. If you were to truly test both your hand grips with, on a dynamometer, you would be able to have pretty well equal grip pressures that you could
So is it
do.
psychological, Tim?
A lot of it is. It's not necessarily a musculature issue as much
Yeah.
as it's a nerve thing, right? So
Hmm.
you've got a complex of nerves that start, kind of at the brainstem and work themselves down the shoulder and all the way down to the hands. I believe it's called the brachial plexus, right? And so as we fire neural pathways, and not to get on a super scientific,
Myelination.
right, but as you fire neural pathways to each digit or each muscle in your hand, right, to grip things, this is
Mhm.
why at a very early age we learn what hand we like to do things with, and we become dominant based on those neural pathways, right, that have been myelinated to certain appendages or certain likes or dislikes. This is where we pick up eye dominance. This is where we pick up hand dominance. But it's not to say that we cannot learn or can't improve myelinating pathways to support hand, or just learning, like the support hand doesn't have to need all of the isolation tendencies that we do with our dominant hand, right? The dominant hand's the one
Mhm.
pressing the trigger. So the
Mhm.
support hand really just gets to kind of be, as Mike Seekler would call, like the big dumb muscle. Its job is just to dominate or crush grip the gun so that the pistol doesn't move.
Hmm. You make it sound so easy.
It is easy. It's just not.
Well, it's so crazy too that we could go into this kind of a deep dive on grip, and whenever I started watching your class, I didn't know what to expect, but I just couldn't believe just in that small portion. I didn't get through, anywhere past that. So I'm sure there's tons more gold nuggets down the road that I can't wait to get to.
Sure.
That was one thing I was going to ask you about too. Do you teach vision differently than other instructors, or your philosophy behind vision, is it different in any way?
It is a little bit. I think there's a few other instructors that kind of, I don't want to say parrot me, but we have the kind of the same general kind of thoughts and ideas and theories about vision. Like I
Mhm.
don't, um, I'm not an advocate of like hard front sight focus with iron sights. Um,
Mhm.
I utilize a more of a target focus, or what I call a soft target focus, to whether I'm utilizing iron sights, which I have predominantly shot for a number of years, which helped me really to kind of just fall right into shooting optics, pistol optics very, 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 very quickly. There wasn't a big learning curve for me because I I never really fell into the indoctrination of hard front sight focus, make sure the front sight is 100% clear and the rear sight's slightly fuzzy or out of focus and the target's out of focus, and learning to aim that way. I've never used that aiming concept.
That's gonna be something new for a lot of people. So, explain why that is.
So I think for a long time we've used, and when I say a long time, say 50, 60, 80 years or however long we've been teaching people to align, handguns to targets. We've I think the word we've always used, of course, is focus on the front sight. And I think instead of the word focus, we really need to be using the word aware. Be aware of the front sight and
Mm,
being aware of everything beyond just the sights, being aware of the target, being aware of between the sights and the target, being aware of things to the left and to the right of the targets. So softening your vision to
mhm,
not be hard accommodated or hard focused to one particular aspect, but opening your vision to being just more aware of everything. Like I can shoot
mhm,
extremely accurately with a full awareness of the iron sights themselves and the awareness of the sights themselves as a system aligned to the target without
mhm,
having to be 100% fully focused, like hard accommodated to the target or hard accommodated
mhm.
to the sights. And
Well, I
so I,
think you're onto something because when I went from a dot to front back to front sights again, to hard sights, I actually
Mhm,
was better because I didn't have a hard front sight focus anymore. I was
sure.
target focused, and I experimented with that, and I was surprised, and
Yep.
it's true. So,
And that's
might
the
be
thing. A lot
something.
of it is because, again, we're indoctrinated with it, right? Be hard front
Right.
sight focus. It's one of the very first things that we tell people, or we, not me, but it's one of the very first things that a lot of instructors tell, especially very new and very inexperienced shooters. Like, hey, you need to focus on that front sight even harder in order to,
Mhm,
to gain a higher level of accuracy. Well, then when people get even just a small taste of an improvement, they tend to adhere to that, and that becomes a conviction
mhm,
that they'll almost take to the grave with them. So then being told, "Hey, like release that conviction and start to think about things in a much broader sense. Be more aware instead of being more focused on certain things." It scares a lot of folks. They're like, "No, no,
mhm.
no. I've had, I'm getting some pretty good experience with this," and it's like, okay, but what if we could broaden that and
Right.
and and really see some huge gains? And it's going to take people to kind of get out of their own way, or get out of their own
Yeah.
limitations.
Well, and for a defensive shooter as well, we're biologically hardwired to focus our attention on what it is that's trying to kill us.
Sure.
So, for us to train front sight focus and then try to apply that in a self-defense situation just isn't gonna happen. It's
Right.
just not. So, maybe it might be good to not train that. Just maybe.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so we are gonna go into the Q&A here. If you guys are good with that, drop your questions into the comments. And shameless plug, please go to defenders-live.com for all things Defenders Live. Don't forget to do that. So let's see. Who is our first question of the night? Oh, it's AJ. Is there an optimal balance between live fire and dry fire?
Ooh, that's I think there is. I don't know that I have found it yet. So it's something
Hmm.
I'm also seeking as well. I used to be the guy that would dry fire an hour a night. I thought, because I read it in books and people had told me, like, hey, dry fire is the way, and that's great and all. But
Hmm.
I quickly, I don't say quickly, I very slowly learned that, like, having these humongous long marathon sessions of an hour to 2 hours a night actually wasn't conducive to the best, kind of the best results. because a lot of times you don't get an opportunity to really validate your work if all of your work is always in dry fire and there's not
Mhm.
enough live fire practice, to again, to kind of validate those habits or to invalidate those habits. A lot of times you think, oh man, this is working great in dry fire. This is awesome. And then as soon as you put it on the clock or, put it to the test in live fire, you're like, wait just a minute. Yeah, I've not been doing this correctly in dry fire because it's not showing up, as a habit or not showing up well,
Mhm.
as a progression in live fire. So I do think there is an optimal balance. I think for many people, time is of course everything, right? And availability. So it's just like people that make every excuse to not go to the gym and work out. They're like, they start January 1 every year. We see it. The gyms
Mhm.
are filled with people with New Year's resolutions. And then you wait about 3 weeks to a month, and all of a sudden it's back down to the regulars again. And,
Mhm.
and shooting is kind of the same way. Like somebody buys the gun and they go take a class, or they really show a genuine interest in wanting to improve, and they go all in on one thing. We see this with with great dry fire tools like Cool Fire Trainer or the Mantis or things like
Mhm.
that. And I think those tools are great for building, like for giving people a want or a desire to improve, but at the same time, they're relying on that one tool to kind of lead them the way, because it's hard for them to get to the gym or get to the range to validate the stuff that they're doing in dry fire. They're only allowing kind of that third party information from a phone or from a tablet and the feedback they get from that to kind of be their, hey, I'm improving. And then when they go to the range, they realize, like, wait a minute, the gun still moves
Mhm.
around a lot more than it does in dry fire when I'm live firing. And whoa,
Mhm.
I wasn't ready for this level of recoil, or any
Mhm.
certain aspect of it. Things are different. So I definitely think I don't want to say you can overdo it in dry fire, but you can overdo it in dry fire. You can get things like tendonitis. You can unfortunately develop bad habits that sometimes,
Mhm.
again, third party software doesn't tell you the whole story. It'll tell you
I
good
was
or bad.
gonna ask you that. What if you myelinate something in dry fire that you shouldn't be myelinating? So, maybe you
Right.
don't know the
Based
answer to this, but I'm just asking it. How
on
much myelination then does it take to then overcome that to the correct neural pathways? Do you know what I'm
so
saying?
generally, whatever you myelinate is going to take at least 2.5 to 3 times that amount
Really?
to build a stronger pathway to overcome that old habit. That's why old habits
Wow.
are hard. That's why they're so hard to break.
Yeah.
So this is where I think, like, if folks could even get to the range once a week, right? If you can dry fire 4 to 5 times a week, and you can get to the range to validate your dry fire with some live fire, and it doesn't have to be a lot. Like your dry fire doesn't have to be, or your live
Mhm.
fire doesn't need to be 500 rounds a week or anything like that. If you could, but regimenting your practice, knowing what you're going to go work on in live fire
Mhm.
is just as important as knowing what you're planning on working on in dry fire every time too. But I think there is a balance to those things. As I've gotten more advanced and, kind of more skilled along the way, my dry fire has kind I don't want to say fallen off, but it's kind of peaked off a little bit now, to where I'll pick up the pistol generally 3 times to 4 times a week, and dry fire in some respect. And I've got a regiment of different things that I work on. Like one day I work on vision skills or transitions. One day I'll work on gun handling skills. So, draws and reloads and things like that. Another day I'll work on movement, position things, footwork and stuff like that. And there's
Mhm.
another time that I'll work on, kind of just like good old fashioned, kind of the old way of dry fire, and the old penny on top of the sights. I don't put the penny on top of the sights, but we're just, where you're just really working on and understanding how to press the trigger and how to grip the gun without disturbing the sights at all,
Mhm.
and minimizing that movement, or completely evaporating that movement from the pistol as much as I can. And
Mhm.
so I work on those things in small segments, and in full isolation to those things. And I think that's very important. So instead of
With
having these
thoughtfulness and purpose.
100%.
Yes,
You
that's
go
the
in and you're
key.
like, I'm going to do a 45-minute dry fire routine, and I'm going to work on this many aspects of my shooting. you're doing it wrong. I would much rather
Right.
somebody take two things that they're going to work on that are pretty well related to each other. And I would encourage them to work on that for a very dedicated and very focused 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes tops.
Mhm.
And then go to the range at the end of the week. Go on a Saturday or Sunday if you can get an opportunity to go to the range and think about everything that you've worked on in your dry fire and just validate those particular things in your live fire. You don't have to do dry fire. You don't have to dry fire, every single day, day in and day out, and one shot draw and fire, and then go to the range and like, okay, I've got 200 rounds to work with today. I'm going to work on draws the entire time. That is
Yeah, that
ridiculous.
would
And you can't get
yeah,
anywhere
that
with
would
that.
burn me out. No,
You know,
no. Yeah,
touch on
there is a
certain things.
past a point of no return.
Right. You touch on certain things and you
Mentally.
create a performance log and you log your performance based on the validation of things that you worked on in live fire to validate the stuff you've worked on in dry fire.
Yeah, and keep track of it and know where you are so you can record progress as well, because we mentally think just like we don't know really how much time things take, like when something feels fast or feels slow,
Sure.
the timer tells us whether or not it really is. Same way with a logbook. If you know you did this drill in this time on this week and this time on this week and this time on this week, you can actually say, "Oh, I see that improvement. It is
Correct.
proven. I can see it written down," versus how do I feel I'm doing? Do I feel like I'm getting better or not? That way you
Right.
actually know. So a few more questions here. Kara wants to know, what are your tricks from helping someone overcome anticipation, crushing the grip and trigger as the shot breaks, and pushing the gun down hard at the shot?
So,
Very
um,
common.
yep, this is the most common aspect, especially for newer shooters. And a lot of it is, especially if they do a ton of dry fire, but they're out of balance in how much live fire they incorporate, right? So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it is we have to we have to subject ourselves to the recoil impulse, right? It's going to take inoculation to it in order to fix it. Like you can't tell somebody to not move the gun when they're pressing the trigger.
I
When
distracted you with the comment. Sorry.
they're and they're distracted with moving the gun around, and
Hmm.
they can't help it. The gun going off is it's unnatural, right? We are not born out of the womb with a tendency to disregard our own safety because an explosion is happening 18 inches in front of our face, right? So because of that, we develop an emotional tendency to the trigger, or an emotional habits, right? Or we get emotional about the gun going off. I hear it all the time. Guys are like, I'm not emotional about it. Well, you are. You're pressing the trigger with some sort of emotion. This gun is going to go off and it's going to do this. I need to react or counter what that gun's going to do. So therefore, I don't want it to recoil. So I'm going to press the trigger and I'm going to push the gun down hard when it happens. And the first thing we have to tell people, or one of the biggest things that I have found to really help with that, is removing emotion from the trigger press, right?
How
I,
do you
I
do
always ask
that?
people, well, a lot of it is you kind of have to be their therapist a little bit. So a lot of it is you ask them, hey, every single time you press that trigger, has that gun one time came back and slapped you in the face? Well, no. Has it ever hurt you in any way from this side of the pistol? And they go, no. Then why are you treating it like it's going to? And they go, wow, I really don't know about it. I'm like, I want you to detach yourself from any emotion at all. Like when you dry fire the gun, and like a lot of times I'll empty the pistol for them and I'll put the gun back in their hand and have them dry fire. And I was like,
Mm,
okay, I want you to press the trigger and dry fire. And of course, they know then the gun is empty. So there's zero emotional attachment to that shot. And guess what happens? They press the trigger, the gun doesn't move, everything is great. And then
mhm.
so I get a little sneaky with them. So sometimes then I'll rack the gun again, but then I'll install the magazine just in the bottom of the pistol. And so sometimes that immediately triggers them to thinking, oh God, the gun is loaded. And so
Mhm.
then sometimes you'll immediately see them press the trigger again. If they're smarter than you on that, they'll go, ha ha ha, I know what you're trying to do. And they'll press the trigger and a nice smooth press again. That's great. Well, then as an instructor, you can reach over the slide. I'll have them continually maintain their grip, and I'll just pull the slide back just kind of short stroke it. And I'll pull the slide back enough to make them think that the gun
Mhm.
has been loaded. And of course, then now there's that, oh, I have to press the trigger now, and that gun's going to fire. And you'll immediately see that what we would consider anticipation of that flinch response happen.
Mhm.
And so we need to get them over that. And a lot of that becomes, hey, you got emotional. You got emotional right then and there when that happened. So
Mhm.
you don't. And they're like, yep, yep, I saw it. And a lot of times
Mhm.
they they're completely benign to the fact that they're even doing it until they
Right.
start to see it. And this is where like things like ball and dummy drills come into play,
Yeah, that's
or
just what I was getting ready to say.
right, all of those types of things. And
Yeah.
and so, like we'll do that a few times. And then of course, then I'll rack the gun again and I give them that indication that maybe the gun is loaded and they don't know and they don't want to
Mhm.
disappoint me. They definitely don't want to disappoint themselves. And they'll press the trigger straight back and they'll press the trigger, not even where it's straight back. They're pressing the trigger with no movement in the pistol. And then
Right.
I'll actually, slide and rack the slide to actually put around in the chamber. But of course, they're so used to that feeling, right? We've inoculated
Mhm.
them to that. We've given them
Mhm.
exposure, so now they don't know the difference. Did a round go
Mhm.
in there? Did it not? Tim's watching me. Bang! They'll press the shot, and the gun doesn't move. And lo and behold, they're hitting exactly where they wanted to. And of course, then it's like now the light bulb has gone off. I just need to do
Right.
that all the time.
Yeah, the light bulb, I've noticed that. You can tell them and tell them in different ways, but until they experience it and feel it and catch themselves doing it,
Mhm.
does the light bulb go off and they go, "Oh," and then they can slowly start to solve that problem themselves almost because they know
Right.
what right and wrong feels like, so to speak, and so then they can replicate how they're supposed to do it
Sure.
rather
There's
than
another.
but they
There's
have to be
another.
aware of it first, that's the
There's
thing.
kind of another therapy trick that I use here too, right? So a lot of times with this, I'll ask them, and I kind of stop the whole class, and I'll ask folks, I'm like, hey, so if we're really trying to isolate that trigger, we need to ask the gun to fire, not tell the gun to fire. And telling the
Hmm,
gun to fire invokes pressure. It invokes anticipation, right? So I
mhm.
I, I kind of joke with folks, and I'll generally find somebody, especially a husband and wife, that might be in the class together. I'll be like, "You guys are married, right?" Or I'll ask, "Hey, by a show of hands, who here is married, has a significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, right?" And everybody like, "Oh yeah, yeah," they raise their hand. I'm like, "Cool." The fact that everybody is still standing here alive facing me right now tells me that your significant other, you've probably done a pretty darn good job if you've got a successful relationship of asking that person to do something for you versus telling your significant other what to do. And a lot of times you'll get snickers from, from people, wives will laugh about their husbands or their husbands will be like, "Oh man, you don't know my wife very well." And I'm like, "No, but seriously, think about it. Like if you came home at a hard day's work, as the husband and you demanded your wife fix you dinner, would she do it?" And some guys would be like, "No, not at all." And I'm like, "Okay." And then others guys be like, "Yeah, she'd do it." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'll bet you wouldn't like what she made you for dinner that day, right?" And they're like, "Oh yeah,
Might wanna
exactly."
be careful.
I said, "You got to treat the gun the exact same way. The relationship you have to have with the pistol is no different."
Mhm.
Meaning that trigger needs to be just it's the asking switch. It's not the telling switch. When I trigger the gun, I need to ask the gun to fire. I don't want to tell the gun to fire. When I tell or demand the gun to fire, the gun's going to listen to me and it's going to fire. But I'm never going to like the results as well as I would if I asked the gun to fire.
I've never heard it described that way, that's really good. Let's see, who else do we have here? Got a couple more, and we're already over the hour, which I knew would happen.
I've got I got plenty of time.
Well, I don't wanna take up everybody's time too much, but I do wanna get to these last 2 questions. So Troy wants to know, can you give a couple of tips for weekend only shooting?
So with weekend only shooting, you're going to treat it the same way you do strong hand only shooting, except that we do have to train the hand then, obviously, to like we're so used to like we should be like once you start to be you kind of advance in your shooting of gripping the gun harder with your support hand, that you're going to have to change your grip pressure just a little bit and release a little pressure with the support hand. That's pressure with the hand. What I don't want to see people do is releasing tension on the tendons in their wrist, because that's when
Mm.
they get a lot of extra movement in the gun. And so we a lot of folks fight that, and so they go weak hand shooting and the gun is all over the place. Structure is the biggest thing, and learning how to put the gun in the support hand or in your weak hand, the same way that when we access the gun with our dominant hand structure and hand position on the gun is the number one priority. Once we get the hands where they need to be, then of course, and instead of squeezing the life out of the gun with the support hand, I want to appropriate the right amount of pressure so that, again, I build isolation in that index finger to be able to press the trigger without disturbing the gun.
That's perfect. Well, I just realized Clint's question is kind of what you've already gone over, but maybe we'll see what you think here. How much dry fire per week is ideal at minimum to maintain competency?
That's different for everybody because
Yeah.
it depends on that person's level of competency, right? If your idea of competency is I want to maintain a 1 second draw to first shot, and that's your and the reason I just keep bringing that up is because that seems to be like everybody's be all end all. I want to be able to draw the gun and have a fast presentation. And there's so many other aspects to shooting that the draw is so, to me, I don't want to say it's unimportant, but it's so down on the list of priorities of other aspects of shooting that are to me are way more important. But we see
Mhm.
this all the time and people fall into that trap. If your big trap is, man, I want to have a sub 1 second draw, then if you dry fire, I don't know, 2 to 3 times a week, just touching on that one aspect of it, that would be plenty to
Mhm.
maintain that level of competency. If your level of competency is, I want to be able to do, 1 second reloads from shot to shot, right? So we're kind of talking competitive types of, shooting skills. Shot to shot reloads need to be worked on. I'm probably working on those maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks or so. But I'm also very proficient in those, so I just need to touch on those for 5 to 10 minutes, once a week, and I can keep that skill level up. Draws are worked on maybe once a week or so. I transitions, moving the gun from target to target are very important. So are eye exercises. Everything from like saccadic eye movement charts to Brock string exercises and drills to work on convergence and accommodation with my eyes, because this is such a visual sport. Strengthening my eyes and maintaining proficiency with my vision is very important. So I touch on little things throughout the entire week. If I'm dry firing multitudes of different things, uh, like I said, 3 to 4 times a week is pretty solid for me.
I see another class in your future, Tim, just on vision. I
Okay.
bet you could teach an entire day just on vision and do cool exercises and
Probably.
concepts, and I don't know what you call it, but, speaking of names, why did you name your class after AJ's company? That actually did cross my mind when you said
Yeah,
practical performance, because I
it
thought,
was
"Wait a second,
it
isn't
was
that his company name?"
purely accident.
Was it?
It was. I had
Wow.
no idea and hadn't heard at the time when I created Practical Performance. I was like, Practical Performance, man, that's such a great name for a class, right? Because
Was that
everything that
before
we
you
do is
met AJ? It must have
high
been.
performance. And this was before I'd ever met AJ. And
Wow.
so I'd kind of gone live with everything. I taught a couple of classes, and then AJ came to, uh, he was one of my students at a class in Phoenix back in like 20 2018. And when AJ showed up, and of course, like I kind of then had known who AJ was, and I'd met him on a podcast we did with somebody. And AJ was like, "Oh, the name of my company is Practical Performance." And I'm like, gulp, I'm like, "Oh my God, AJ, I'm so sorry." But by then I'd already kind of
It
had my
worked
name. And
out.
I was like, well, we're just sticking with it. So, but, and
That's
it's great
interesting
that we,
because
we teach together now, and like I said,
yeah,
it's great. So
it had a happy ending, Tim. Well, it's not
absolutely.
an ending, happy beginning even.
It did. It
Well,
did.
that's funny because I had another, somebody message me that has the same has a show called Defenders Live on YouTube, and they messaged me one day, and, I ended up just being on their show, and it was like a joke. We both have the same name, Defenders Live, and so yeah, that's on my YouTube channel now. If you guys want to check that out, I thought that was interesting. But that's a really cool coincidence, Tim. I did not know that. That's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
ending to the night. So we're going to
Agreed.
wrap it up tonight because we're over the hour. And as always, Tim, I just want to thank you so much for your time. We could have talked about grip the whole hour. I had enough
Sure.
questions to do that. But just because I want to talk about grip, maybe doesn't everybody else want to talk about it. And there was a ton more stuff too that I didn't quite get to. But you're just always a pleasure to have on, and I appreciate your time, your
I appreciate
expertise,
it.
and answering all of our questions.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Tim. All right, so let's see what we're going to be doing next week. Next week, we're in May, right? Yep. May 17th. I don't even know how to, I'm kind of embarrassed to say. I actually texted him and asked him how to say his last name for sure, but it's the marketing director for H&K, Bill Dermody. I'm not sure, but I'll know by next week for sure how to say his last name. Heard great things about him, but he is the U.S. marketing director for H&K. He's a firearms industry veteran of more than 25 years and has promoted brands on both the hunting, sporting side of the business as well as the shooting, personal defense side. He's an eager learner and considers training and promoting training the best part of his job. And he says he prefers dogs over humans any day of the week, and smoked meats are his love language. He literally sent me that for his bio. So that should tell you his sense of humor. He's going to be a lot of fun. He was recently, if you want to see him in action, he was recently featured on Gun Talk Media with Adam Winch on First Person Defender. And that is on the Defenders USA YouTube channel under other appearances. There's that Gun Talk Media show, First Person Defender, with Bill Dermody. I don't know yet. So anyway, we're going to be talking to him next week. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you all will tune in for that. That'll be Wednesday next week, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. We'll see you then. Until then, take care.